Welcome to the monthly Journal of Expressive Writing Open Mic. I'm Kelly Dumar. It is November 6th, 2025, and we're featuring tonight poet John Muro, and we're going to get to him almost immediately. But I want to give you a tiny bit of background first about our open mic, which is going to follow our reading with John. And we do only signups in advance. So we already know who the reading list is going to be. You know whether or not you're on it. And to help Katarina Conan, who is here and really helps to manage our open mic, I would love it if you would put your name into change your name if you need to, so that Katarina can tell who's here for the open mic. It's really helpful for her. So whatever name you signed up for in the open mic, your name is Hector Rodriguez. Just make sure your little Hollywood square says Hector Rodriguez, your name, whoever you are. Okay, so that would be really helpful. And thanks, Katarina. Do you want to say anything, Katarina?
No, you've covered it. Thank you.
All righty. We will be putting into the chat room the order of the open mic. And when it is your turn, I just want to remind you, we really ask everybody to read something 3 minutes or less. And I do actually use a timer because we really try to keep a tight ship. I may have to interrupt you if you go over 3 minutes. Please don't take it personally. Please come back. We want to hear your voice and we're really appreciative. And we just may have to interrupt you. All right, now, Jen also really is so good at if you've been published in the journal before, she gives links to where you've been published, to your article. Please feel free to talk about who you are in the chat room. If you're reading in the open mic, please feel free to say where people could see the rest of your published work. Maybe go to your website, that is fine. And mostly it's really wonderful when you make appreciative comments for the poet who's our feature or any of the readers in the open mic. If there's a line or a word or a theme, something you appreciate, please feel free to put the comments in the chat room. They're always greatly appreciated. All right, so Jen, would you like to say hello to this beautiful group tonight?
I would. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Oh, it's so good. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see everybody. And John, we're just thrilled that you are a featured author tonight. And I just want to give a shout out that I think just yesterday or 2 days ago, John told me that he just got his 4th Pushcart nomination. So huge congratulations to John. And thrilled we have 13 readers tonight in our open mic. And it's always just such a pleasure. It's one of my favorite nights every month. So thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So John's going to read for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then I'm going to have a few questions for him. And if you have a question for John, please feel free to put it in the chat room, and then I can ask him any questions that we see waiting for him there. And then we will go into the open mic after that. So I am going to... I didn't mean to mute you, John. I inadvertently muted you, so can you unmute yourself? Thank you. What I was trying to do was spotlight you. Thank you. Okay, so about John Muro. A lifelong resident of Connecticut and a lover of all things chocolate, John Muro has authored 2 volumes of poems in the Lilac Hour and Pastoral Suite in 2020 and 2022, respectively. His 3rd book of poems, A Bountiful Silence, was released in the fall of this year. It's fresh off the press. John's a graduate of Trinity College, Wesleyan University, and the University of Connecticut. His professional career has been dedicated to conservation and environmental stewardship, and he's held several executive and volunteer positions in those fields. He considers himself fortunate to have worked at the Wadsworth Atheneum, the Bushnell Memorial, and the Hartford Stage Company early in his career, and his passion for art, music, and literature remains to this day. Since the publication of his first book in the fall of 2020, John has been thrice nominated or a guest 4 times nominated for a Pushcart Prize, twice nominated for the Best of the Net, and he's received several awards and commendations for his work, including a Grant Chester Award in 2023. His poems often reflect a profound appreciation for the natural world. You'll see that tonight, you'll hear that, and the small miracles that are to be discovered in the ordinary and the everyday. Nature often serves as a source of solace, revelation, and renewal in his work, and his poems have been described as lyrical and spiritual explorations that often incorporate visually arresting imagery and sound. Kelly Russell Agaddon, Robert Cording, Sean Forbes, Rennie McQuilkin, and others have praised his work. John's poetry has appeared or is forthcoming in numerous literary journals and anthologies, including Acumen, Barnstorm, Belfast Review, Connecticut River, Cool Beans Lit, Gray Sparrow, River Heron, Sky Island, the Valparaiso Review, and elsewhere. John lives in Connecticut, on the shoreline with his wife, Deborah Ann. Welcome and thank you so much for being here to share your poetry with us tonight, John.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, well, Jen, thank you as well. Kelly, thank you. And thanks to all the participants. I appreciate your taking the time to listen. So what I thought I would do tonight is start with 2 poems from my earlier book, The Pastoral Suite, and then cover a couple of poems from the most recent book, A Bountiful Silence, and time permitting, a few poems that are new, have been published, but they were published after the release of A Bountiful Silence. And as Kelly mentioned, you'll note my poems have been described oftentimes as pastoral, and as Kelly mentioned, nature remains a primary source of inspiration for my work. So I thought we'd start with a poem entitled Woodwinds. This first appeared in Sky Island Journal, which is one of my favorites. And if you're not familiar with it, by all means, please check it out. Wonderful editors, and I think wonderful work. Woodwinds. They make the most of the raw poverty of our breath, taking leave from the blighted canyons of our lungs, and in haunting timber, give eloquent voice to anguish. Barely able to hide their sadness, they make visible the holes in our hearts, our bent towards darkness, and the beautiful blemish of afflictions that often come upon us like a sudden abundance of dusk, rising through a narrow embouchure or the moist lip of a wooden reed. The second poem, also from Pastoral Suite, is entitled Great Blue, inspired by a great blue heron. And it first appeared in Writer Shed Press. And the editor of that journal is an author and poet named David Berner, very talented writer from Greater Chicago. And David, I guess I dedicate this poem to you now. Great Blue. With morning's weight falling away and a light fog lifting, I caught sight of you, still as an indrawn breath on the periphery of a bay that was calm as pasture. Gold-eyed, bright, and tall as a child, your sleek canal of neck funneled a terrace of dusky blue into your coin purse of body, eerily motionless, as if you were in some nautical stupor, wondering how best to navigate this middle stretch of life, or how to hold on to those things that sometimes resurface, only to turn and fall away again, or perhaps weighing how we might continue to bear all that tethers us to earth, at least until a wind swept you up and led you in tedious flight across tidal pools that smelled of salt hay and the damp mantle of marsh. Early light sliding from your wings as you became more phantom than bird, a thing that's indistinguishable from the tongues of tides or a cloudless patch of sky. I also will say a good many of my poems, probably too many, feature birds as metaphors or as the subject matter. I'll now move on to a selection from the collection entitled Bountiful Silence. This first poem is called Restoration, and Kelly suggested I might want to read this. It first appeared in Green Ink magazine. Restoration. Wanting for warmth, evening's wonderstruck, it has folded in upon itself. And in the darkness, snows falling in deafening silence, flake upon frenetic flake, laundering the air with a will to soften the earth's hard edges and bring abundance and beauty back into this world, obliterating bleakness, ghosting the landscape, rounding out the wide wounds that wish to hold it, while windless hands in hushed assembly rebuild stacks of firewood, raise snow-capped roofs, level tilted porches, and add heft to doorsteps, bordered by evergreens and the thin topmost branches of leafless shrubs. And in the farther field, a few boulders remain exposed, just above the bluing drifts, like heifers, foraging for thin winter grasses, when a stream of light from somewhere beyond my line of sight leaks through the darkness, slowly revealing the world's second, better self, just returned from the afterlife, stark and still and miraculously luminous.
John, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
It was in and out a little bit on your mic. So
Okay.
I don't know what's whether it's when you lean in too far or whatever, but
Okay.
what I'm gonna do is I'll just interrupt you if it's getting very faint, and if it's fine, I'll obviously leave you alone.
Okay.
Can it readjust a little bit, maybe? I don't want to interrupt you, but that's just one idea I have. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I had mentioned earlier, I've had issues with the microphone. So can you hear me okay now?
Yes, now is perfect.
Okay. I apologize.
No worries.
So this poem, also from A Bountiful Silence, is called Something More Than Winter Weighs Upon Me. It was first published in the Delmarva Review, and it also has a winter theme. Slowed by missteps and an unshakable grief, I'm approaching the trail's end, watching the waning light dust the top of the tree line, where a few solitary leaves of clipped gold flutter like torches set upon the crowns of beech, while a congregation of juncos, shaped like tiny sable flames, seem to blur and bend the low-hanging branches, noting how even the winds waited too, with frost and wood smoke, and rank with leaf decay. In the further field, snow as soft as fly ash is swept across the thin shell of ice that lacquers the pond, adhering to the edges of tombstones, leaning away from wind and much too close to earth. And I pause to consider how all seems to be near or at an ending, and so takes on the muted hues of heartsore gray. And I see what little light is left to this day, knowing too that I've done few things well in this life, and that it is not so easy to displace loss or to cast aside regrets or to somehow ease the even greater weight of those I still carry deep inside me. Hopefully you can hear that one okay. So the next poem is
Yes, that
called,
was fine. That was perfect.
okay, that was good, okay. Straining my lungs, but I'm doing my best. So this next poem is called The Quelling. It first appeared in Cool Beans Lit, which is the journal that brought Kelly and I together. And given last night was a full moon, the largest and brightest of 2025, it seems appropriate that I read this poem. It's candidly one of my favorites. The Quelling. I've often longed for an evening such as this, when moonlight gilds the pathway with a bronze varnish that washes past the woodshed and floods into pasture, before pooling beneath a dry stone wall where a few leafless trees seem to arc towards a lovelorn earth. And I hold certain in the damp stillness that follows dusk that this night, even with its raw silence, will never know loneliness or lack for wonder, with its delirious ballet of bats, a woodpecker's rapid fire ambush of a barkless tree, the divine presence of slowly emerging stars, and the purr of wind pulling down cooler air that tastes like ash upon the tongue and will be taken in and later, deep in sleep, enter the blood. This is another, I apologize, it's another pastoral poem. And candidly, it's one of my favorites as well. It first appeared in the Connecticut River Review, and it's called A Rural County in Connecticut. For those of you who are not from New England, it may surprise you to know that 60% of Connecticut is considered forested. And even though our state's only 5,500 square miles, it really is a beautiful state. And fairly crowded too, at 3.6 million people, but 60% of the Connecticut is still forested. It's just wonderful. A rural county in Connecticut. I prefer to wake in a place such as this, where morning air is marbled by mists and the overlapping branches of trees are bound in glister. And a particular joy is found in the tributes that come from the throats of birds, and then finding a footpath leading down to a field that appears to be floating in light, bordered by clusters of birch and low granite walls, unperturbed by time, imblued with lichen, as if the land knows the soul is in need of this and would happily keep it paddocked here, while the endless greens of summer bleed into cider reds and flamboyant yellows, fluttering or falling in a rummaging wind. And knowing we die a little each day, I've come to believe that heaven is closer to us than not, and that there's less difference between what is and what could be, and it would not be so difficult to spend a second lifetime here. So we'll move away from the pastoral, this is a bit more personal poem. It first appeared in Deal Jam magazine, and it's entitled, Why I Choose to Waken First. Because I know how much life has already taken from you, and how difficult each night's descent into the sleep has been. While eager for refuge, you lie down beside me, still trying to live with an otherworldly pain, and burrowed in blankets that insulate your body from the ache and frenzy of this world. And how a few times each night I waken to your fitful dance with dream and the sound of your breathing, rising and falling in a dull, draped in cloud purr, finding it near impossible to pull away from the warm bond of our bodies as I rise before daybreak, dragging despair in the past behind me, and prepare the house for your solitary arrival, ever mindful to breathe deeply and pray before setting aside the medicines and tea, opening the threadbare curtains and adjusting the window frame in such a way that it betrays the brighter beauty of birdsong. It helps to make the endless expanse of blue bearable, while allowing the walls and what little is left of the darkness to fall away, at least until the day I waken, God forsaken and heart emptied to a life without you. So this next poem, also from A Bountiful Silence, first appeared in the Valparaiso Poetry Review, and it's called Beholden. Excuse me. Beholden. I'm wondering how best to preserve this.
John,
Yes.
sound on that one is out.
Okay. Okay.
That's better.
All right. Beholden is the name of the poem?
Yep.
Okay. I'm wondering how best to preserve this day when I find myself summoned outside into the warming light, tossing my net beyond the low islands and the jagged edge of the sound, hoping its threads returned in gilded attire, yielding a tangle of blessings culled from both sea and hollow that are a mix of old growth splendor and the commonplace. While I fall back to silence, watching the way the morning light breaks apart and is then quickly redrawn by wind that blurs and wrinkles the surface of the water, and entranced by the soft rustling of the beach grass, the taste and tang of salt-scented air, while white-capped ties are fused with the same muscle blue hue as the open fist of sky, and seeing how both air and water are stitched together by these clamorous gulls, rising in rapture, then swooning toward shore and asking what more can be done other than to try and somehow slow Earth's hurry and call summer back. So the last one I'll read is the, wasn't planning to, but Kelly suggested I might want to read this. It's the title poem to the book A Bountiful Silence. And it first appeared, I believe, in Sky Island. A Bountiful Silence. It is the in-between hour when daylight slowly turns to lose itself in the embrace of evening. And I've come in search of the stillness that lingers between the swell and hushed exodus of the tides. Those rare fugitive moments soon after discourse is diffused and beaches itself. And time grows slack, and one must work harder to hear the breath of an elusive earth, exhaling in the rasp of brittle, ice-crusted reeds, the amplified rocking of the wind in search of freight, and the faint wails of white-winged gulls, then gazing back at the illuminated squares of cottage windows, where short-sighted day has hurried to warm itself, nodding drowsily by firelight, having left such endearments to those of us who willingly welcome the gradual lilt of loss, the betrayal of hope, and the louder expanse of silence. So that concludes the few selections from A Bountiful Silence. And these are just one or two new poems that have been published, but were written after the publication and the release of A Bountiful Silence. This is a nautical themed poem, which is another common theme, having lived on the shoreline for over a decade. The sea also inspires me in many ways. It's called Reappraisal. Half asleep, I'm watching summer dim and darken as the incoming waves stall a short distance from shore, as if they're having second thoughts before they collapse upon themselves and advance towards a row of ghostly cottages that are now boarded up for the season and slumping away from the long arms of the marsh. And I'm watching how the outlines of those furthest from me reemerge in fading light, like large pieces of driftwood left behind by the receding tides. And in a world that's so clearly shattered and enamored of emptiness, beds of slender, long-throated flowers have convulsed and withered, and mop-head hydrangea are relinquishing their deep blue opulence that I suppose even a late summer sky might envy. And I soon realized that even the common gulls are complicit, having abandoned the cooler air, and now everything appears as if it were a loss or in the act of surrender. And I can sense the season's soft diminishing as a soft gust of wind glides over the distant bluffs and across the surface of the water before it slows and falls to dreaming. And when day breaks, I commit to gathering up remains of this broken world, bits of shells, whittled bones, and wave have left behind in tangled nets of sunlight, and listen to the slurred cadence of the water as it thins to silence in its slow, deliberate retreat from shore. I kind of misread one of those final lines. I apologize. This is one of the last poems. It's called Kintsugi. And kintsugi is a Japanese term, and it refers to the Japanese art of repairing broken objects, such as porcelain or ceramic. And they're repaired with lacquer that's been dusted with gold. And thereby it highlights the fractures and the flaws in the object. So the goal is not to make it look perfect, but to embrace its imperfection. So that's the genesis for this poem. And there's no nature and there's no birds. Kintsugi. If only a life could be repaired with such delicate precision, reassembling and mending what's been split into pieces with a drizzle of lacquer and a dusting of powdered gold, while allowing the breaks and blemishes of our undoing to remain visible. But the simpler truth is that a life of enduring grief cannot be so easily fixed, even by a quiet mind in such pleasing means of repair, where intricate fragments are faithfully rejoined, leaving our fault lines exposed and making no attempt to disguise the deeper damage. And so we go on, a sad and disfigured thing, searching for what once was and incapable of unseeing the past, while knowing all the while most things in this life can never be truly fixed. And it is only a matter of time before we fall, fracture, and find ourselves broken again. So the final poem is entitled Overwintering. And this was the one that just got nominated for fourth pushcart. So I'm thrilled about that, as Jen mentioned. And I hope you enjoyed this poem. It's another seasonal poem. I'm undone by days such as this.
Okay, I can't hear you, John. So
Okay.
sorry.
All right. So the name of this poem is Overwintering. And it's the last one I'll read tonight. I'm undone by days such as this, with sunlight just arriving, the color of mead, washing across the undulating drifts that run along the fence line like mainsails, placed one after the other. while elsewhere the snow spattered against furrows of tree bark, as if it is seeking a way to clamber back to heaven, or at least to the understory, where a few hush-winged birds still sleep, sharing their perch with a sky of improbable blue and a queue of listless clouds. And yet, despite the stillness and the cold, I find myself grateful for air that's clove scented and a land that's littered with felled branches, upturned stones, and shells of ice glistening like fractured pieces of antique glass, free of sound and motion, and still months from the thaw and frenetic rush towards rebirth and the gradual unveiling of an overturned earth. So that concludes. Thank you for your patience, everyone. I hope you heard most of what I had to say.
Oh, we did. We did. I believe we did. There's a lot of comments in the chat room, John. So
I'm sorry, I can't, I didn't read any of the comments.
we don't
So-
expect you to read the comments while you're reading.
No.
At all. Okay, so I think your reading was greatly appreciated by our listeners, John. I'm sure it was by me. And yeah, read the comments later when you have a chance. Let's just chat for a few minutes because I wanted to ask a few questions. And well, I really wanted you to be willing to maybe talk a little bit about your process. And I'm just going to zero in on right away. Let's get to the heart of this. You apologized more than once for your pastoral poems, or, oh, here's another poem about nature. And I'm a nature lover. And I have to say, I felt so entranced, so relaxed, so, I don't know, elevated, calmed, listening to your poems. So I'm curious about your sense of that. I'm just curious about what you fear people may resist about pastoral poetry.
It's a fair question. And I can't say that I am true to myself. If people are seeking poems that don't aspire for beauty, that maybe cover subject matter, civil disobedience, civil justice, etc., that's not my wheelhouse. I've always, growing up in Connecticut and for many years in a rural town, nature's always been a source of inspiration. It's as simple as that. And I've learned a lot about my own tastes, my own predilections, my preferences. I also know there's some journals that enjoyed the type of writing that I shared with all of you tonight, and there are some that do not.
Right.
They may consider it, too formal or too lyrical, possibly self-indulgent, although I don't think any of my poems are. I always try to make sure there's a philosophical point beyond the subject matter that one can draw. And an overriding thing is that we do not recognize the beauty that is in this world, and what God has given us. There has to be a creator. There's just so much beauty everywhere you look, large, small, and I continually am amazed at the grace and beauty in the world. There's a lot of awful things too, to be sure. And each of us go through our own trials and tribulations. Grief is another subject I cover. And some of it is just feedback from editors I've worked with. And they said similar things to you, Kelly. If that's what you love and that's what inspires you, don't walk away from it. And I haven't, even though I know there's not that many of us who write, about pastoral themes so consistently, or nautical. So I hope I've answered your question.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm quite interested in your process, and I know others in here. I mean, everybody, most people who come to our open mic are also writers, maybe of other genres, but I think people are curious about your process. I certainly know that I am, because what I can tell about you and your writing and you as a human being is that you seem to spend a really lot of time outdoors in nature, observing. It seems like your poems are so acutely observed. And I'm curious about how your process works. Just tell me where a poem comes from for you, if you would. Well, let's talk even about, yeah, let's look at A Bountiful Silence. The poem A Bountiful Silence on page 57, if
Sure.
anybody else has the book. So, the awareness of the wind. Are you doing this from memory? Kind of a Wordsworthian, you're going and remembering all of this on the, quiet of your couch and then putting it into words. Are you thinking of your poems as you're walking around observing nature? How are you writing them? I'm curious, John.
So this particular poem, our home on the shoreline, we're blessed. We're able to see Long Island Sound, and there's many a day I'll simply sit in the back or take a walk. Locally, we have marsh, we have ocean, we have a little bit of everything. And one of those walks, I saw that inspired the Blue Heron, the Great Blue poem. And I was just struck. It stayed so still for so long. And I wanted to do more than just depict the beauty of that scene. And that's when I married, I'm in midlife. The bird could possibly be, it was an older adult male. It probably was in the middle of its life. And that's when I drew the connection. I will say a lot of my poems go through many, many drafts. Sometimes it's
Evelyn was asking about your revision process, so that would be great if you talk about that.
it's extensive, and I'm not quite sure why, but there's always a draft, a second draft, a third, a fourth, and sometimes a total rewrite. And other times it's just I'm looking for a certain word, and I think that's kind of the painter in me. I am an awful artist, but I love art. I worked at the Athenaeum. Always have loved art. I've always loved classical music. Debussy and Ravel are my two favorite composers, both impressionists. My favorite artists are, not necessarily all French impressionists. I like some expressionists as well, but it's the looking at the detail, looking at the beauty, looking at the color. That's what's always attracted me and inspired it. And sometimes it's an image. Sometimes it's a phrase that comes into my head that's the basis for a poem. Other times it's reflecting on what I'm looking at, and it's affected me in some way. I just completed a poem last week, and kind of a mixed metaphor. My wife and I had taken a walk. Obviously, it's near peak, still in southern New England. And I was just struck by the beauty of the trees. And I know that's a very common theme, but it almost felt like an arrow was going through my body and into my heart. And I thought of Saint Sebastian, who you may or may not know was a saint that was persecuted, and common theme, arrows being shot into his body. And that became the genesis of a poem about the beauty of the outdoors, the landscape, feeling like I was struck by an arrow. And then further on, seeing all these hills that were also gilded with yellow and orange and every color imaginable. And the phrasing I used was that, and again, this is prose, not the poem, but if you were fortunate enough to get past that initial archer, all these trees, you have a regiment of archers that's going to, that you're going to face when you hit the open field. I like to think the poem is a bit more eloquent than what I just described. I'm trying to respond to that was the inspiration, and that became the basis for my latest poem.
And Grace is asking, and I'll get to your question too, Rosalind. Grace is asking, is there a particular line of yours that is stuck in your mind, and why is that?
A particular line. Oh boy. That's a really good question. I've never thought about that.
Well, do they come back to you, your own lines from your own poems?
Yeah, they do, and sometimes I want to work hard at making sure that none of my adjectives or metaphors or similes are commonplace. Not that they need to be bizarre, but I want them to be unique and fresh and strike the reader as if they are there themselves. And maybe someone has never looked at a certain object in a certain way, like in the poem I read, "Something More Than Winter Weighs Upon Me." It was an artistic expression, but the tree had very few leaves left, and one was near the top, and it was golden. And I just thought of the artist Klimt. So the expression Klimt gold, that's where that came from.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And that is interesting too, because that is a line. So it's obviously coming right back to you. Something more than winter weighs upon me. And there it is, the particular line that's can stick in your mind.
Yes.
And you want to give the reader the experience, I think in so many ways you're giving us, the reader, the experience of seeing. Seeing really in a very deep way, but also then you're also not just seeing, but you're pairing the seeing with maybe philosophical insights that are suddenly surfacing for you as a result of the seeing.
Yes.
I
think that's a fair analysis. Yeah.
And let's see, somebody was asking, oh yeah, Rosalind is asking, are there any particular poets who speak to you? I'm sure
Absolutely.
there are.
Absolutely. So I was an English major, even though I spent a lot of my time in the private sector. I got my bachelor's and master's in English literature. And here too, I'm kind of an anachronism. My favorite poet was John Keats, the English Romantic poet. And I read many a biography on Keats and Shelley. But there's something about the later works of Keats, his odes, for example. I can't explain it, but I've always been attracted to him. And really, my knowledge of contemporary poetry is not as deep as my knowledge of what we might call historical British literature, American literature. Wordsworth, Keats were very early influences, Keats still very much so. Among contemporary poets, she has passed, but I don't know if any of the participants tonight are familiar with the poet Amy Clampett. But I remember reading quite a few contemporary poets and not enjoying it at all, quite candidly. And I came across Amy Clampett on my own, and boy, her book, The Kingfisher, is one of the greatest poetry books, I think, in the 20th century. And I don't know how many people even know about her, but she's just a phenomenal poet. I like her a lot. Wallace Stevens, Robert Frost would also be in my pantheon. They're very different. Stevens more philosophical and metaphysical. Frost definitely in the pastoral tradition. So those would be among the ones that I turn to and read, and I dedicated. I used some quotes from Keats in the beginning of A Bountiful Silence. The line, it's an epigram, whatever it is. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. That's from John Keats, and that's in the beginning of A Bountiful Silence.
So, last question.
Sure.
Putting together this manuscript, can you tell me in 2 sentences what method you brought to your madness? How did you order this
There's 3 chapters.
huge collection of poems?
There's 3 sections in the book. The first section was seasons, so all poems that were inspired by the seasons were gathered in one section. Poems inspired by, nautical, the sea, the ocean. That was the second section. And then the third, and perhaps more personal, was about relationships and grief. And that was called Hearts and Hands. So that's how they came together. I probably kept as many poems out as I put in. So, but that's how that collection for that particular book came together.
So, well, thank you so much, John, for all this amazing sonic and emotional. At one point, I asked the chat room, how are John's poems making you feel? And I really meant, I felt like I was really going into a different kinds of feeling space, that I was really being lulled, relaxed, but stimulated. I felt very alert, but also very calm and quiet. I do think that the silence is bountiful in your work. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Jen.
And if you
And
will,
Katerina, thank you.
I'm going to remove our spotlights because it's time for us to spotlight the people in our open mic.